Okay, so yeah, I guess we'll just get right into it. Boom. So you were speaking about J. Allen Hynek delivering a computer to Paul Benowitz that had uh, software on it for him to speak to aliens.
Yeah. and so, yeah, Greg Bishop was the first one to really talk about that little bit of information in Project Beta, which was kind of controversial that, and people that are admirers or fans of Hynek were kind of outraged, and they still are, that, don't want to believe that he was involved in that. But wherever this computer came from, and allegedly it was the Air Force who put the software on that. There was other witnesses to this. I mentioned Greg Valdez. He and his father Gabe visited Benowitz and saw him interacting with this computer, and yeah, he thought he was talking to ETs, and the software would also produce these pretty primitive computer images of what the ETs supposedly looked like, and they were, insectoid and reptilian types. So you can see where a lot of these tropes, appear to have come from the whole Benowitz affair, as it's been called. So that kind of of Benowitz and the Dulce base story. I mean, we could get into a lot deeper into Dulce base mythos, but
It's like with UFO talk, you can always keep going deeper, right?
Yeah.
Like the tropes, just like conspiracy theory or similar to conspiracy theories, are just inexhaustible almost, and you can just rearrange them and present a different angle of a story, which sounds like that is what has happened here with the Dulce papers, and also the MJ12 documents. And it seems like a major player in that obviously was Bill Moore, who came on the scene, I guess, as you write in your book, around 1980 with his book Incident at Roswell, which became a big commercial success. And that also promoted a trope as well, correct, in that book?
Well, probably a number of them, but the crash saucers and all of this ultimately led to the MJ12 papers as well, which Moore was involved with. But yeah, the Roswell crash, that's like the mother of all the UFO crashes now, I guess. But it appeared to be, there was similarities there with the Frank Scully story in Aztec, and a lot of the same things. And as far as the witnesses, the original witness, Jesse Marcel, was interviewed by Stanton Friedman, who was a research partner of Bill Moore. And the original accounts, Marcel, who went and looked at the crash and took pieces away. He was like a Army intelligence officer. None of those early accounts talked about ETs. Those only later did. New ET witnesses supposedly, emerge backing up the Roswell story. But the deal here is that so 1980, the incident at Roswell comes out, and so this is becoming a pretty big story. And at that time, Moore was out doing promotion for the book when he was contacted by this shadowy figure later known as Falcon, who was this intelligence officer who said, he was impressed with Moore's research. He thought he was a sharp dude or whatever. Maybe he was uh, just playing up to Moore to, basically to bring him into this tangled web that later became the Benowitz affair. But what he offered Moore at that time, this is like 1980, was a deal that Falcon, who claimed to be a government intelligence agent, pretty high level one, would share classified UFO material with Moore if Moore would assist in helping them monitor, infiltrate might be another word, the UFO movement, ufology, the different UFO groups, because once again, he had concerns there that he had a lot of people involved in UFOs were also civilians involved in like different aspects of a lot of these classified programs, like the stealth bomber at that time or the space shuttle. And so Falcon wanted more to keep track on what was going on. What were these folks talking about? What were the stories in ufology? And it was through that nexus that Moore began interacting with Paul Benowitz around that time too, and passing to Benowitz sometimes dubious UFO documents that suggested, alien invasion, these type of things going on. So, those were, he had those connections. And so in 1984, these documents called the MJ-12 documents appeared out of nowhere. They appeared to come, they had a mailing address of Albuquerque, New Mexico, but nothing else. And they landed on the doorstep of a guy named Jamie Chandray, who was Bill Moore's research partner during that period. And what these documents ended up being, or what they claimed to be, were these classified things about this group called MJ-12, Majestic 12, that delivered a briefing to President Eisenhower in 1952, and it talked about, confirmed supposedly, the Roswell crash and a couple of other UFO crashes, and that this MJ-12 group was in charge of the extraterrestrial situation, and that they had taken an alien in captivity at one point, and that they had put together some type of treaty with the aliens. So all of this happy horseshit was in these MJ-12 documents and subsequent documents that came out, which, interestingly enough, confirmed the Roswell story, which was Bill Moore's book. Later, the FBI got called into it, and they were, trying to figure out if these documents were legit, or these classified documents that had been illegally leaked. Ultimately, the FBI came to the conclusion they were bogus, but they never could find out specifically where they came from. And so this became a part of this overarching story, about the secret treaty with the aliens, and that kind of plays into all these other stories. The Dulce base story, Area 51 had a lot of the same legends that there were aliens there, underground, underneath the facility, some type of base, and all these bases you know, especially the late 80, Area 51 were having all of these sightings, and so the government, it appears, or you know, people associated with intelligence agencies like John Leary became pretty prominent as a ufologist during that period. He had intelligence agency background, that they were basically pushing these ET memes and tropes to kind of this confuse and muddy the waters of what was going on with all the secret testing of craft during this period. And once again, putting out at times uh, different information they would leak to different people like Moore that would put it in the UFO research community. And some of it was legit information about these secret programs, and they wanted to see, you know, like pass on some, for instance, this is just like an example, pass on a photo of what was alleged to be a UFO, but it was actually a secret government craft, and you know, pass this to maybe like a Russian spy and to see what his reaction was if he actually knew that it was a government craft. Those type of things. That's all part of the spy craft, you know, to find out what other people know, to confuse them about what actually was going on with the secret testing, to interject the alien thing in there, to release phony documents for one reason or another.
Yeah, and one thing I thought was very interesting in the book as well was when you were speaking about Bill Moore and Chandira's MJ12 document find, um, was that how they sat on the information to maybe research it and see how much of it might have been true. But while they were sitting on it, they were told, or at least Moore was told, that, okay, you're taking too long. Someone else is
Mm-hmm.
going to release it, the UK researcher Timothy Good. And, you know, that being an interesting sort of, that also maybe being a technique as well, right? Like
Yeah.
Colin Wallace has called it the double bubble technique. So, um,
Yeah, and you see, well, part of that, it's kind of with the Dulce base story. When the Dulce papers got released in 88, this guy right about Tal Levesque was involved with that and promoting the story and writing other stuff under a pseudonym of Jason Bishop that had to do with the Dulce base story. But then he was sharing this with other UFO researchers at the time, and all of these, like a half dozen different researchers, were getting this Dulce base material, but they were putting their spin on it. And all of these different stories all seemed to confirm the same story, but it was, you know, Tal Levesque and John Lear too, he played a role in really creating this mythos. And you have all these other people who are working with him, wittingly, unwittingly sometimes, to be like this echo chamber of repeating this story and putting it out there to different venues. So it looks like you got a bunch of independent sources confirming a lot of these stories, and really they're, you know, just coming from one place.
right on. And maybe a very good example of that was the 1989 MUFON conference. Uh, I don't know if it's split or if they all spoke, but as you wrote in the book, you know, there was, along with John Lear, who organized it, I think, or he played a big part in that 1989 MUFON conference,
Mm-hmm.
but also Bill Cooper was there, maybe Linda Moulton Howell, um,
Yep.
and Bill English, and then lastly, you know, putting on the show of the night, Bill Moore and his famous speech, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, what happened there with that particular conference? Like, why was that such a significant moment in this whole charade?
Well, things were kind of coming to a head with the Benowitz story prior to that '89 MUFON conference where Bill Moore spoke, and get to that in a little bit. But prior to that, there was this thing I write about called the Crestone Conference, which was a year or so before that. And this was all for like, it wasn't a big conference like MUFON. It was just more like a get together with this core of UFO researchers, and John Lear and Linda Howe and David Perkins and a number of others came together. And I originally found out about this interview. Bill Moore was talking about this conference where the whole Benowitz Dulce base story came together, and they were all sharing information about this. And out of that really came they devised, they being John Lear in particular, what this Dulce base story would be, and how all these elements later, like the Greys, that came out of the Benowitz story, so that became part of the story, and with the underground base, and supposedly they had information from this lady, Ann West, confirming the Dulce base story. And so this really, that was like '87, this Crestone conference. And David Perkins, who was there at the time, remembered John Lear wanted to put together this like mission statement, basically about the current state of affairs in ufology. And the thing they could, one thing they agreed upon was that UFOs, one way or another, were involved with cattle mutilations, but that was basically the consensus. Lear wanted to take it farther with this whole thing about an alien invasion and secret treaty and all that, and the rest were going, well, we can't really go for that, But that became John Lear's thing, and wrapped into this was this Benowitz information. And right after that Crestone conference, Lear visited Benowitz for a few days, and something happened there, and it not really clear, but they had some type of falling out, and
Maybe they got abducted together.
no, well, Benowitz just left ufology for good after that. He wouldn't talk to anybody, got rid of his phone number there, and it was like something happened between him and John Lear. There's some theories, but I think the bottom line is that Lear kind of co-opted the whole Dulce story, and maybe I know some of later Benowitz's materials ended up in other places, and Lear seemed to have a role in that. So something went on there. But what I'm getting to is that a year later, '88, is when the Dulce papers were released, which told this whole story I told before about the secret underground base and the Dulce War, etc. And Lear was the big promoter of this, and this was what was going on. He had also written a paper called the Lear Statement. This was back in the days of the old bulletin board user groups, and so these were the big stories in ufology during that period, about the Lear Statement, how there's an alien invasion. This was kind of repeated by Bill Cooper, and this, it had to do with, once again, Dulce base, the secret treaty, how the aliens were abducting humans, and even they needed to create these hybrids because they were a dying ET race. Even stories that the ETs were drinking the fluids of human children to stay alive. This sounds like me tropes that go back to anti-Semitic stories, and some of the aliens had big noses, according to Bill Cooper. But so anyway, all of this was going on leading up to that '89 MUFON conference. And Lear had a big role in organizing that, and that's when Moore, I guess, he had enough, didn't want to be associated with this. He was on the ground floor of the Benowitz affair story, but what he basically laid out in his presentation, he came clean, said he had been part of the government operation in his role to this kind of monitor ufology, but he was also, he claimed that he never knowingly fed Benowitz bad information. Who knows? But also in this speech, he pointed out how Lear, he didn't name him directly, but it was obviously who he was talking about, and Linda Howe as well, who he didn't name directly, but it was obvious who he was talking about, were pushing these bunk stories that were basically based on Paul Benowitz going down the deep end and believing, all of this was an alien invasion that was working out of the Dulce underground base. And so that became a big, a big deal in ufology there. And of course, Bill Moore afterwards became a pariah and soon after left the field for good.
Right. And yeah, I think some of the footage was captured in the great documentary Mirage Men.
Mm-hmm.
And Greg Bishop has written about it and spoken about it very well, as I guess he was friends with Bill Moore, and as he said, he was working the merch booth.
Yeah.
He said he should have probably sold rotten fruit outside because of the reaction from the crowd. It was like a Gigi Allen show or something. People were going crazy. But
Yeah.
what you mentioned Linda Moulton Howe, and how we haven't touched on her yet. Very briefly, why Moore may have mentioned her name was, as you mentioned in the book, in 1983, around that time, she had already made the movie, or maybe was making the movie Strange Harvest, which was the documentary about cattle mutilations. And she was, I guess, given an invite or something, and she went to the Air Force base, wherever it was, and she met Richard Doty, and she was given the old read but don't copy routine.
Mm-hmm.
She was brought into a room, told to sit in a certain place. She was unaware that she was being filmed, and then given a bunch of documents that seemed to blow her mind and seemed to really set her on this track where she does still seem to believe that the cover-up is still extraterrestrials, is still the core.
Yeah.
But so Moore was calling these people out. There was a huge response. And, one thing that he said in terms of the disinfo stuff was that every time that one repeats an unverified a bit of information without qualifying it, one contributes to the disinformation process. And that barely happens. I think it's already sort of, this is worked into these disinfo campaigns, that they know that people are just going to parrot the information. They're just going to repeat it without verifying it, and maybe it just shows the refinement of domestic disinformation campaigns, right? Which is so significant today, having America just lived through a domestic disinformation campaign with QAnon, feel like, and where we are possibly presently at with the whole eminent, or whatever this is, this acknowledgement of the reality of UFOs or AUPs or UAP or whatever, like, where do, for people who are really sincerely searching for the truth in this, right? Like Fox Mulder, like, where can one ballast oneself within all this, like, obviously reading books like yours help, because like, that's the great thing with what you and Bishop and Mark Pilkington are doing with your work, is this sort of deconstruction presentation of the tropes within the UFO movement, you know, because so many people get caught up in the story itself because it's so interesting. And but you have also you've had a huge sort of life-changing UFO experience, correct?
Hmm. You could call it that, whatever it was. Yeah. You want to hear about that? Is that where we're going?
Well, you know, like, well, just in terms of the significance of this isn't just a, you know, kind of psychop inspired, cynical, skeptical take on UFOs. Like, what I really like about the book is that you're in the community. You were, you know, you
Hmm.
were a embedded journalist, if you will, and it shows, you know, that this, you know, you are presenting these criticisms with a certain amount of care or sympathy that sometimes, so, you know, at least for so many years, the UFO topic was just so taboo and, you know, something that people scoffed and laughed at. But here we are now in 2021. There's like, you know, no UFO shaming. There's less UFO shaming going on now, you know, and but how important it is for this new generation of searchers or whatever to know the history of domestic disinformation campaigns that have been filtered and run, you know, and aimed at anyone who's interested in this topic. Yeah.
Yeah. There's something called UFO Twitter these days. Have you seen that?
Haven't I think I've seen you talk about them a bit.
Well, yeah, I can be pretty snarky too, but that's part of the looking at the history and living through this a few times. I mean, every decade you see the same stories, you know. Again and again, it's going to be UFO disclosure. And yeah, going back, like I had my own crazy experience and, you know, growing up, I wanted to believe. And, you know, I grew up in that Close Encounters and In Search of, and all of, you know, those type of things were an influence on me. And living through these different eras in ufology, all this the MJ12 stuff and the Dulce base, and these continue to resurface all the time. They get entered into this other story with that's going on with TTSA and that UAP report and all that. You still have elements of MJ12 in the story when you know DeLong first got into this or became involved in talking to emailing John Podesta in like 2015, whatever it was. Part of the information he had to do with MJ12, and it's like, people, really? Wait a minute here. Take a step back, you know, before you invest a lot of belief or money into this. This is one of the things they're promoting is that the MJ12 Roswell saucer crash was a real story, you know. So you see these tropes come up time and again. The folks who are kind of new to this story, who got into ufology, UFO Twitter here in the last few years, are unaware of, don't have knowledge that, you know, this game's been played before.
Yeah, and it's amazing how some of the players are still the same. You know, like how you described that nexus
Yeah,
from Doty. I mean, John Lear is still around. You know,
that's what I was telling. I did an interview about a week ago, and they were asking me, okay, what's up with the UAP report and all this? And I said, well, to understand what this UAP report is, you need to go back to 2017 with the launch of To the Stars Academy. But to understand that, you need to go back to like the early 70s when Hal Puthoff, for instance, a scientist, kind of pseudo-scientist who'd done government stuff, was working on this Stargate project, which had to do with remote viewing. You know, Uri Geller and these people, psychics, they were testing, and you know that ended up was a CIA-funded experiment through you know, a front group called the Stanford Research Institute. So Hal Puthoff is one of these guys who have been around for years, and in the 80s he became part of the Aviary, which was this group connected to Bill Moore and Doty and John Alexander and these same characters. During that same period, Alexander, who's with the military, had a similar group within the government that called the UFO Working Group that were looking into UFOs. So you had all these characters back then pushing for UFO disclosure, or some people weren't sure. There were different agendas. Some think it was a disinformation campaign. Who knows? But this group of people evolved in the mid 90s to be part of Robert Bigelow, the entrepreneur, you know, who's has a space aerospace company, but also involved in researching Skinwalker Ranch and UFOs, and they kind of took over MUFON, or were able to get a lot of the data from MUFON during that period, Bigelow. And part of this group, Bigelow started to research all this stuff. It's called NIDS, National Institute of Discovery Science, had these same players that were in the aviary, Puthoff and John Alexander. Doty was allegedly involved at one time or another. And that feeds into the whole TTSA thing, because those same players are, some of the same players are involved with TTSA. Bigelow seems at least one time or another was somehow involved with these guys, according to the original New York Times story. Is probably he probably was some dark money behind the To the Stars Academy, and all of this. You know, it's continued. They've been able to manipulate the media and keep this story for going. For what agenda does this have to do with aerospace contracts? Perhaps one of the key players is Christopher what's his name? Christopher Mellon, who we saw on 60 Minutes just recently, is tied in with Harry Reid, who is tied in with Bigelow. Mellon's been a lobbyist after serving in the government high-level position. So part of it looks like a lobbying campaign. Part of it was like getting stuff out, you know, some media stuff, creating content, television shows, this or that. And other things are, you know, when you originally reached out to me, Stephen Greer is calling it a psyop. Maybe there's multiple agendas going on here, and a little bit of all of that is going on with what has, you know, been going on with To the Stars Academy, and this what this has led up to, this UAP report, which I really don't expect to be much, but I think and the people who are promoting this narrative and the fans of this, even if it doesn't appear to be much, they'll be saying, oh, no, there's a lot more going on. You need to read between the lines. It becomes kind of like a QAnon thing. Trust the plan.
Right, right. I mean, to ask the question, what's being covered up, in the book, you present a story of a possible cover up, or at least you're relaying the story of Nick Redfern, who seemed to investigate this, about one possibility with the whole Roswell UFO flap story might actually be covering up, as I said, and that is something that was really kind of disturbing, you know, and the notion of Fort Stanton and
Mm-hmm.
you know, medical experiments, and then basically, you know, torturous type experiments on internees, World War II POWs, some of the internees being Japanese internees. And can you talk us through that a little bit? Because I think that's one of like the core elements of the book that's just like mind blowing. You know?
God, I don't know if I can talk you through it. Whew, boy. Well, yeah, that was one of Redfern actually wrote about in a book called what the hell did he call that? The Body Snatchers from, I forget what the title was that. He's written so many books, but yeah, it had to do with this theory that the Roswell crash was actually, they were doing human experimentation on people with this condition called progeria, you know,
An oversized growth or of aspects in one's head, or that's a something like that, right? Like
yeah, but they're also like children, though they're stunted, but and they don't have any body hair, and they look kind of like uh, aliens. And that was part of the material that Redfern came across. And he was working with other researchers like Kathy Caston, who's no longer around, and it had to do with yeah, that Fort Stanton's also involved with it, and that they were basically using the Roswell crash as a cover experiment. Now, this is as well might have been some type of disinformation, because Redfern came across this material from another researcher by the name of Timothy Cooper, who got a new trove of MJ12 papers in the when was it, the late 80s, early 90s, and part of it had these leads about, you know, these experiments going on at connected to the hospital at or sanitarium at Fort Stanton with World War II internees, not only people supposedly with progeria, but also, you know, Japanese internees allegedly. But and a lot of this new batch of MJ12 material, which was never once again verified. Cooper said it was the real deal, but there seemed to be evidence that maybe he concocted some of this stuff. But then it's also, these papers also had some links to like Russian disinformation campaign, and you know, the Russian disinformation campaign concerning AIDS. So it's like the Lebowski thing again. There's a lot of how's it go?
a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous, a lot of whatnots.
Yeah, and another element of all of this, these materials that uh, Redfern was accessing. I mentioned Kathy Caston. She was another researcher, and she's passed on. She passed on her papers to Nick. But one of the things that she had gotten information on was that there was about a secret government program that was remote viewing the Roswell crash. And so that was kind of intriguing. What I discovered that kind of maybe confirms this was going on is there's a remote viewer named, his last name's Graff. I forget his last name, Graff. He's one of the main remote viewers, and back in the timeline here, it was like the 70s. He was affiliated with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and he had put together trying to remember, Delgraph is his name. He had put together a remote viewing group, kind of extracurricular activities. It wasn't on government time, but these were affiliated with people who worked at Wright-Patterson base military intelligence folks. And supposedly back then they remote viewed the Roswell crash. Now this was, I guess, prior supposedly to Friedman and Moore putting out the book on the Roswell crash. And so one of my theories, or one thing to consider, is that, yeah, there was a remote viewing going on, and they did remote view the Roswell crash. And to try to confirm if the Roswell crash really happened, they whipped up some of these phony documents and put them out there in the world, and to see if they could get some confirmation, or who would pick up on this story.
Right, and then that just being another
I,
counterintelligence sort of technique in a way, yeah. Like
and
just
so the remote.
yeah, I'm listening.
Oh, you broke off a little bit there, but the remote viewing angle is another thing that comes up repeatedly in the book, and seems to be a part of this whole story I read about in Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks, UFO Disinformation in the Age of Aquarius.
Indeed, indeed, yeah. And I think, I don't know if it was Kathy Caston who said it or the remote viewer who said it. It was pretty poetic, but it began and ended at Fort Stanton.
Yeah.
And I found that story somewhat fascinating, though, because, I mean, if it is disinfo, I mean, then it's pretty good disinfo, right?
Yeah.
Redford said he got the FOIA documents that confirmed that there was human experimentation going on, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But as you said, though, like, it's where he got the information from to begin with, and that's always an important thing with seeking to determine, I guess, the veracity of information, is who's telling you, and what are their sources,
In conjunction with that, Keston got into researching a lot of these different crafts they were using, the kind of dirigible type. There were different ones, and more monitoring crafts that they could launch, and they were testing those out in the desert, in that area during the same time period when they were doing, the human, some of this human experimentation. And at the same time, the Roswell crash supposedly happened once again, where some witnesses claimed they saw these strange-looking little bald-headed guys, or they could even been mistaken for Japanese internees at that time. So yeah, who knows? It's intriguing. That I was trying to remember the name of Redfern's book. I believe it's Body Snatchers in the Desert. Intriguing read. I mean, who knows for sure, but it's Nick does some interesting research, and he just takes the information he has and tracks it down as far into the rabbit hole as he can.
Right on. And like you said in the book, it all started for you, right? It began and ended, I suppose, with Tal.
Yeah.
And he's another character. I mean, is he a disinfo agent? Is John Lear? Are these guys disinfo agents, or are they are they bad actors, or are they just useful idiots? Right? I mean,
well, yeah, it's hard to tell sometimes. I mean, you just don't know for sure where the disinformation ends and the misinformation begins. It's it's a spooky world, and in that world of spooks and kooks, you're never quite sure, who is who is an actual spook, who is an actual kook, or who is this being used as a useful idiot, you know.
Well, who is Luis Elizondo? That's what I want to know. Why do we all have to listen to him? Uh,
God, how much time we have left here? That's
let's keep going. I don't know why the thing didn't shut off. If you have a couple minutes to keep going,
hmm
um,
yeah.
that whole story of getting present of where we're at right now with TTSA and also Bob Bigelow and the Skinwalker Ranch, and one thing too, I guess it's like those people who are coming up with the theories, but then they already have platforms and mouthpieces already instituted now, from Art Bell's Coast to Coast, where George Knapp and Linda Moulton Howe were both
hmm
parts of that show, and they're now both big characters in this current, UAP flap. You know, uh, it's interesting, and it's weird that these are the same people that and now they just accumulate a couple new people. Now you got Blink 182 guy, sing. Now he's involved in it, and but.
Yeah, and I think there's a good deal of astroturfing going on too, with your typical stuff that disinformation, or you can say disinformation campaigns, or an influence campaign of a lobbying campaign. But yeah, you have a lot of these same characters. I was going to mention Bigelow before Art Bell started Coast to Coast in way back in '95. Prior to that, Bigelow funded a show called Area 2000 with Art Bell, and so there was that relationship there, and Knapp and Linda Moulton Howe, they were all in Nexus. They were all interacting. They're the same folks still engaged in this story that goes on and on. I lost track of where we were taking this, but
Tal, your buddy Tal.
yeah.
Hiding out in the Dan Aykroyd bunker underneath House of Blues in Mariposa County. Was he?
now,
Mhm.
now I don't. Hard to say. I mean, he definitely gave off that spooky vibe, and claimed to have been working as a security officer for a number of years. But what really came to me over time, and what I believe to be was the case, that he was a lot of this the Dulce base story that he was promoting really had to do with things he'd been involved with for a number of years. The whole Shaver mystery. He knew Richard Shaver. He put out a zine back in the day called the Hollow Earth Hassle, that has to do with the underground world, the Hollow Earth, all of that stuff, and the entities that live down there. And at some point, he became involved in this Dulce base story, found out what Benowitz was about, and he kind of took all those elements and crafted his own story that brought it into the science fiction age. It was kind of like Richard Shaver's story of the Diros put into the modern times, with the Diros now being reptilian ETs, etc. And so Tal, in a sense, was a myth maker. I don't suspect he was a government disinformation agent, but I don't know for sure. He definitely engaged with a lot of these people who did have these shadowy background. But what I think I was going to say, the overall Dulce story, which is the story of the Dulce War, and the heroic security worker Tom Costello was really a composite character based on Tal himself and Paul Benowitz. And I talk about that in the book, and I asked that to Tal a few times, was, Thomas Costello a real person, or was he a composite character? He said, no, he'd always tell me, no, Costello was a actual dude, and that Tal knew him in Santa Fe, etc. And as I document in the book, it's like in the appendix, I kept bugging Tal about this for years and years, and he finally just had enough. And he said, "You don't get it, do you?" Um, Thomas Costello was a made-up character because I had a larger story that I wanted to tell. I wanted to make, and in a sense, he wanted to make the whole UFO story more romantic and sexy again. And so by weaving into all these elements with the secret underground base and Dulce and alien hybrids, all of which he had a large role in propagating those myths, did indeed take on a life of its own, as we saw, as once again I mentioned the X-Files, and all these stories now are embedded in UFO culture forever.
The confusing anyone seeking to find the truth. And I guess I hope he's getting paid some kind of ghostwriting royalties for the X-Files,
No, he didn't. And Tal has passed on. He passed on a couple of years ago.
Wow. Right. Sad to hear that. Hopefully he's on the other side,
Mm-hmm.
Not in the hollow earth, but beyond.
Well, there's supposedly some cool places in the Hollow Earth, so that might not be too bad.
Okay, all right on, like little caves or something that don't have radioactivity all
Yeah.
from the government dropping bombs. But yeah, I mean, I guess before we leave, one last aspect that you tie into the book when speaking about disinformation, and this is another big thing of today. Most of what was that ufology mythos that was being created was during the Cold War, right? So as you said, there were Russian and Chinese spies seeking to get information about aviation technology and stuff like that. But then also on the other side of it, fighting the intelligence war, the KGB creating a number of different conspiracy theories, targeting the American population. For instance, well, like you have in the book, Operation Infection, which was a big thing in the mid 80s where KGB floated through fake news the idea that AIDS, HIV was created inside a laboratory in Fort Detrick, Maryland, and
Mm-hmm.
and so what you also put in the book was that some of these MJ12 documents, because there's different iterations of the MJ12, it just keeps getting reinvented and rebranded. So the newer MJ12 documents seem to have elements of a Operation Infection feel of maybe it's no longer the KGB. I don't think is it the KGB still? I mean, it's no longer the Soviet government, right? But there's perhaps the waves of foreign disinfo being aimed at Americans, so now we're in this age of, you got the domestic info being aimed at America, and then foreign disinfo being aimed at America, like Robert Anton Wilson said, don't panic, it's reality that's malfunctioning.
Mm-hmm.
You're not crazy. Like they want you to fucking feel crazy, and but very briefly, could you just add a little spice on that, the Operation Infection element of in your book?
Well, what Redfern picked up on, and I'm trying to remember the exact connection, but a lot of the stuff that came out of this iteration of these new MJ12 papers. First of all, they came from a supposed intelligence officer with the last name of Cantwell, Cantwell, which was kind of an odd name, and later became evident that a guy named, I think it was Dr. Alan Cantwell, is the only person with a name close to that, and he was the propagator of a lot of these theories back during that period. He picked up on all this Russian disinformation about AIDS being supposedly cooked up in a lab. So there was that angle to it, that there's a possibility that it was actually Alan Cantwell, this AIDS hoax, or this AIDS conspiracy theorist that was behind these MJ12 docs. And what also appears in these documents is a lot of the typical Russian propaganda, but it's coming from the mouth of aliens sometimes, how the aliens are chastising the American government for their things they've done in the past, the genocide of the Native Americans and African Americans. And, you know, of course, all these things happened at one level or another, but all these elements are also used in disinformation campaigns, as we see, you know, currently with like people trying to paint, cause these divisions in society, basically between, you know, with race relations and, you know, claiming that Black Lives Matters are terrorists, and these type of stuff are all, you know, the same type of, it's the same type of playbook, basically, you see in these disinformation campaigns. So basically that's what Redfern was picking up on, some of these later MJ12 materials, that it might have been just a test case. You know, a lot of times they're just throwing these things out there and seeing if they'll get picked up on, like the project or Operation Infection went through a bunch of different iterations. And early on, as I recall, it started with some type of publication that was out of, can't remember, Africa or somewhere, that was actually a KGB fronted news outlet, but nobody knew it was Russian.
Yeah, it was called the Patriot in India.
Okay, Patriot in India, and so they floated. They used that publication, which was a, basically a front for KGB Russian disinformation. Nothing happened, as I recall, for a couple of years. Then they pulled it out again later, dusted it off, and published the same material, maybe in a Russian outlet, but they quoted, you know, the Patriot from India, like they were quoting an outside source. And so, you know, that's one of the things in the playbook. And I talked about, like, you know, the UFO disinformation as well. You can do the same thing, and it kind of happened with a lot of the information Tal was promoting. He would feed to people, and they would repeat the same stories he gave them with different twists. So it looked like you had multiple independent sources confirming this, you know. So, you know, that's part of the playbook as well. I don't know if I answered your question sufficiently, but there you go.
It was great. No, thank you, man. Well, saucers, spooks, and kooks. You know, you've dropped it out there, so hopefully it'll get picked up by a lot of people and read and studied by a lot of people, because I think it's one of those books for sure. It's a really great telling. It's a historical telling of I think, you know, things that people should be aware of, right? When they go into the realm of, you know, they all started with watching the X-Files, then all of a sudden you wanna storm Area 51. Like, I think that, you know, your book is a great addition to critically analyzing and being aware of the information that's out there about UFOs. And thank you again, man, for putting it out there.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Right on, man. So Adam Gorightly,